Okay, everybody, we're ready to begin.
Sorry.
My apologies for my tardiness. You all for being prompt. Sorry you had to wait. This is a special meeting, of course, technically of the Board of County Commissioners. Really, this is our interjurisdictional fire department meeting. I'll quickly do public comment and then we can get started. So if anyone is here for public comment, you're on Zoom, please raise your hand. I see floor participants. Are any of them members of the public?
Yep, the other one's Chris.
Okay, I'm going to close public comment. Thank you. We're now meeting as the Emergency Services General Improvement District Board of Directors. First time I've said that. Don't really think I have to. This is our joint meeting to continue to discuss the fire department and its challenges and its future. I'm going to go ahead and hand it to Jonathan Barch.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Is it Megan or Beth?
That's me running it.
Maybe just it's fine.
Oh, sorry.
Our goal here today is to do two things. One is to have a revised IGA, a red line version. Thank you, Peter, for your review. You've received that. We want to talk through those particular issues. Peter has a time constraints and we're going to did you want to do questions? Right. Is that for me? Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to figure out, is Mitch Houston online?
Oh,
I was pointing to the cloud.
we only have 4 participants, so he's not there yet, but I will keep checking.
No, just so you guys
we
know,
also
I have
want to talk
until,
community survey. That's really intent is to inform the funding strategy going forward. And I thought what would be useful is just to back up just a little bit in terms of my colleague Laura and my involvement and go through kind of how did we get here today to a revised red line IGA. And so I'm going to do this real quick, but it's meant to be a grounding of kind of where you've been. I think there's some useful things about what you've talked about in moving forward. So next slide.
There we go. Geez.
Okay. So we sort of got engaged about, look, we want to engage, evaluate governance and funding options, understanding what changes can be supported in the long-term, effectiveness, organizational goals, address increased funding needs. The mission CIT report was submitted. That was sort of the basis for beginning discussions. With this, we were wanting to ensure that there weren't any gaps in terms of the formal IGA or services and what steps that you could take to be able to move forward, presumably in concert with each other, because getting additional funding sources would be challenging without this kind of agreement. So that's sort of some of the early process goals. Next slide. We looked at the various options, and one of the things that I heard really clearly at the beginning was wanted to take a full look at the range of options. Let's look at the pros and the cons, particularly related to the funding, governance, staffing, and so we've been working through that over the last number of weeks. We talked a little bit about this group's vision and values, and we talked about this is not a replacement for the fire authority's mission and vision and mission, but sort of the things that are important to you that would guide kind of where we're headed, which are, you know, the vision of that safe communities through effective fire prevention and response, accountable, collaborative, both in terms of the response and in terms of prevention, sustainable, sufficient funding, movement with a safe and professional coordinated volunteer and career staff, and sort of that idea, as well as a more engaged community about the importance, the issues, and the issues that are relevant to fighting and preventing and responding to fire authority. And so that was sort of those discussions there by that time. And at least from my memory, there was starting to be some groans about what are we doing? Are we? And then next, we started to next slide. So we started to look at, okay, so how are we gonna evaluate these options? Here's just a little bit more detail associated with that last slide that you talked about. You know, there's some pieces here as you move forward with a revised IGA that you may wanna kind of think about as you evaluate sort of the implementation of this. Next slide. So what have we done? We've developed both shared understanding of your perspectives. I think that was one of the things that you really want to hear. The conversation around governance and the values underpinning those, as well as the needs of the fire authority, particularly from funding. We narrowed those considerations of the governance all the way from eliminating both the status quo, the ESG ID, and honed in on this idea about a revised IGA that would look at a special district Title 32 aspect going forward. So next slide. So, you know, again, our goal is that here before the end of I forget, it was October 1st or the end of October to have a revised IGA. I think we're really on track for that. I know from talking to a number of you that there's still questions about that, and that's kind of why we're meeting. Next slide. We want to look at in the revised IGA, and I'm going to turn it over to Peter here in just a second, about expanded board representation. Obviously the sort of outcome of the community survey to inform the funding levels, obviously wanting to keep it under that 10 mils. A commitment to kind of pursuing a go, no go and consideration of a Title 32 special district. And next slide. Was kind of leads us to the IGA red line. So that Laura and I spent a little bit of time trying to think about, like, what was the progression? I think Jeremy, you at some point in time said in the middle of that, are we going to get anywhere on this? On getting to the decision related to the governance, and appreciate that kind of, you know, kick in the butt, if you will. And I think, you know, today is kind of looking at the specific red lines. And our goal there is to identify whether it meets those needs, whether there's some specific additional changes, and what else do we need to talk about before you start to move forward with your board presentations and socialization of that work. But before we do that, there's a lot of words. Anything about kind of where we've been and where we stand today that you want to either highlight or kind of reflect on, something that Laura, my colleague, and I got wrong? What do you think? You know, I guess I didn't mention this. I should have that in the middle of this process. There was the tragedy and loss of Sean Wood, and so, you know, it's you know, that there's been a lot related to that. So yeah.
I think if we're gonna review the red lines of the IGA, we should be reviewing the actual red line document. It shows the red lines and what was crossed out. The one that's on the table doesn't have that.
Okay, yeah, so we'll get there in just a second. Anything else in terms of kind of where we've been, where we are now? And pretty close on a lot of conceptual issues, both governance, funding, the role of Title 32, the board representation. Anything else there that want to move into? Peter, I know you have a limited amount of time, so I want to respect that.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Sure can, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I have until 2:40, so I do have enough time at least to probably get through the bulk of what we need to with me.
Okay, great. Then I can slow down my speaking.
I have to leave about 2:40. About 2:45 to get the meeting as well, so I'm good for another hour and a half.
Sorry, I rushed through that. Because I wanted to, yeah, go ahead.
Quick question in response to Kelly's request for red lines to be printed. Who wants a copy?
I was just gonna make enough records. That's okay. Or you don't want
And
that?
I think we can also then project the red line version on the screen, and you can see it in that way as well.
When I opened the last red line document that Peter, that says.
Maybe we need 5 or 6. I mean, I can just use
Final
them.
red lines, it came last,
Is that it?
Saturday.
Which one, make sure we got the right one.
I saw it Thursday, 9/19.
That's the green and yellow.
For some reason, when I did a search, that's what came up last, and then I just went through it, and I see a bunch of yellow and green
And Megan.
yellow and green highlights, but I don't see the red lines themselves.
Mine came on Saturday morning.
Did it?
Okay,
Yeah.
so Peter, which version, we're doing some printouts.
I'm looking at the one that Brian sent out to everyone on Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock. 9:21 at 1:01 is when he sent it out to everybody.
Okay.
But the interesting thing is I'm just opening that and I don't see red lines. I see the same green and weird.
That's funny because I open that and I do see red lines.
It may be your setting.
I see red lines and highlights.
I don't always see the red lines until I actually download it.
Yeah, I think that's what's going on. I had opened it.
I think it's the same version.
That's
Maybe
the
when you
same one
printed
that's
it.
on-
Just give us a second here and, yeah,
Red lines on
so
it?
Brian sent this on Saturday at 1.
It's changed.
And we'll project that onto the screen, Peter, as well, while we talk through that. Is that
After
what you-
accepting.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
probably
happy to share my screen if it's easier.
Yeah, that'd be great, Peter.
Being printed.
Oh, I'm
Thank you.
sending it to-
You're including his comments?
Should we be?
Peter's gonna project it.
So while we're doing those printouts,
Do you see it?
sure do.
Yep.
Yes.
Good.
I have it on the screen and I have a printed copy. If somebody does not have one right now, you can just take mine. It's got some notes on it, but.
Like purple lines.
Okay,
And
You can read it.
Peter, take it away. Well, and I guess my thought was that we just work through section by section. We highlight where there are changes, clarify issues as necessary and move through in a kind of a yeoman's fashion, if you will, without, spending additional time on areas where there's not discussion or changes, but that's, just call stop if you want to, if it's moving too fast. And take it away, Peter.
Sounds great. So what I sent out and what I provided to Brian and our board members and that he gave to you is basically, you'll see a lot of changes that are just Scrivener's changes or stylistic changes that I decided to take advantage of this time around. We didn't make some of these changes when we negotiated this a couple of years ago, mostly because we just wanted to get the meat and potatoes part of it done. So some of these things are just minor Scrivener's changes and stylistic, and don't really require much discussion. I'm sure among you all, things that just address, how we address the current agreement, what we're creating, which is the new 2024 agreement. Just so you all know, the reason it's 2024, even though technically we feel like it goes into effect January 1st, 2025, it's because technically it actually goes into effect December 31st, 2024, because that's how all the other agreements have started and ended. So nothing in these sections and the whereas clauses change anything substantively, only just referring and doing some cleanup. Same thing here under parties. I just clarified so that it's clear when we say party, what that can mean as opposed to just parties. And I cleaned up some other Scrivener's things, such as when we previously defined the fire authority and yet it got restated in its full when we had already defined it as CCFA or authority. So I kind of cleaned some of these things up. This provision here, which is number 4. I'm moving hold on one second so I can move this. There's actually no reason to have this anymore, because we do not separately support our own fire departments. And so none of this really applies. It may have initially, but I don't think it applies anymore. And probably hasn't really been applicable since the 2012 at least.
I think we need to keep it.
Why is that?
So-
Yeah, why is that?
Because the 4 municipalities are still able to have volunteer members in different levels. And they may or may not want to have a fundraiser. Because, and I know for sure Georgetown and Idaho Springs have a volunteer membership that has money in the bank. I think it's not gonna hurt to keep that in there, but unless you have a reason why it shouldn't be.
What I was not clear is that any of the municipalities maintain their own fire departments still.
They don't maintain their own fire department
Okay, so since this
technically,
talks
but
about,
there's still volunteers that have activities throughout the year with their remaining volunteer base.
We dissolved ours.
They're not 100% gone.
Okay.
As
so
of what?
even just so you know, even if that is the case, there's nothing to prevent those fundraisers or whatever you want to do. Those are separate and independent. I don't believe we
Okay.
need this in the agreement to say that you can do it. There's no prohibition, assuming that whoever's doing those fundraisers clears that with whoever they need to clear it with.
Okay.
So there's no prohibition about additional fundraising, pancake breakfast and fireworks, or those things, but it's not accurate because you're not supporting, the parties are not supporting their own fire departments itself, and there's nothing that would prevent that from happening independently. So that, and so I think as a principle of an IGA of not including things that aren't relevant, brevity would probably be sort of, I think would be a principle. So as long as you're okay with that clarification, then anything else on that section before we move on the continuation of the fire authority? Powers of Clear Creek Fire Authority.
Okay, I didn't change anything here other than the stylistic citations. Went to the duties of the fire authority. First question I had, since some of this language was probably from the 2012. The first section says here, the authority shall establish and maintain an employee grievance and appeals procedure so as to afford all employees and volunteers a mechanism to contest and have reviewed disciplinary or other adverse job actions. So presumably that should have been done a long time ago. So if it does, do we have it written? Do we
Use that same principle?
It's in the personnel manual.
Yeah,
So that's been established.
Okay,
Yes.
so what I can do is I'll change that to the authority shall continue to maintain an employee grievance or I can just simply remove that. I don't have a preference either way. If you keep it in here, then there's just an added duty to make sure that it's maintained. Which I think is fine personally, but.
There's a big section of it in the personnel manual.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
been,
foresee it ever being taken out.
yeah, it's been a personnel manual since 1999 and it came up. It got thrown into this after some other things. So I think removing it from this document would make sense.
Okay,
Because those events are well in the past.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how it fully got added to the document initially, but it got added and it kind of stayed.
It reads to me as sometimes you look at these documents and you can kind of see a history of conflict. I'd rather just
That's the way to say it.
call that water under the bridge and get it out of there.
okay, that works for me.
Anybody else? Let's strike it then.
And
Yeah,
just so you know,
raise your hand if I say, well, let's strike it and you don't agree, or we're moving too fast, something like that. So, but to the extent that we can kind of move through this, that's great. Keep going, Peter.
okay, and just so you know, I will fix the numbering because some of it does not automatically repopulate. So that is that in that section. I took out 6-9 because that's no longer applicable. That section related to the request for proposals for the mission CIT report, which ultimately came about. It was a request for a consultant. So none of that really applies anymore.
Okay.
Any concerns there?
Don't see any.
Okay, with what was 6'10", but now is probably going to be 5'8" or 5'9". The parties shall periodically investigate other organizational models. What I changed it to was in consultation with the board. Originally, it was just essentially the authority, but it didn't really specify if that meant the authority board or if that meant, when they say the authority, the parties to the IGA. It seems to me that based on the structure that we've been doing for the past 9 months or so of these meetings among the municipalities in the county, along with Kelly and Jeremy, it seemed, and the other board members, that this language would make sense. It might also allow a broader push because now the parties will actually start moving that process if the board itself doesn't. So anybody have a problem with this?
Yeah, do. Okay. Keep moving, Peter.
Okay, so now this is where things are more, and I think there will be more discussion. In this section, it was heavily edited, and you'll see here, but I'll start back at the beginning. With regard to the makeup of the board of directors, I understood during our last meeting, it seemed as though there was a consensus to increase by 1 the amount of members that the ESD has.
Peter, let me stop you there. I should have reviewed this document prior to the meeting. That is not what I recall.
Okay,
I recall 3.
A total of 3.
I recall 3 additional,
okay, for 11.
1 from each area to get to 11. I don't want to rehash that conversation. I want to check and see who else recalls that we talked about 3 additional, 1 from each of the 3 areas that were identified. Does anyone remember something differently?
I thought it was an additional for a total of 3.
My notes actually say that we would add 3 additional, that those additional 3 would come 1 from each of the areas on the map that Jeremy brought us. And those appointments would be by an entity other than ESD. And my notes say we talked about having the fire authority approve those appointments.
What I recall was that those 3 seats were going to be nominated by the Emergency Services District Board, confirmed by the Fire Authority Board. They would have a term of 4 years. And, right, is this?
That's my understanding.
And we had a lot of back and forth about whether 11 was too many, and we understood that there were pros and cons, and I think we kind of decided to embrace.
The 11.
Yeah, this is a lot of voices in this room. This is the organizational model we're
We
embracing.
prioritize the more representation voice, yeah, so I think it's a total, that is my understanding in terms of the notes.
Additionally, the ESD keeps their 2 appointed members.
Correct.
And we just added the 3. And I also recall that those party members weren't voted on by the Fire Authority Board as it's written here. They were appointed through the normal channels. It was just the 3 additional from at large that were voted on by the Fire Authority Board.
Correct.
Not everybody's represented.
Correct. So Peter, does that sound, I think what we need to do is basically.
I completely understand now what it is, and I can basically reject what I did here during this meeting and just show you, because that's a lot simpler than what I did. Because I misunderstood, and I was under the impression that instead of 2 members, ESD would simply go to 3. I didn't do the math, of course, and I understood that we were going to be nominating now as appointing. So I missed clearly part of that intent. This is easily fixable. But I would say probably in terms of time, I know what you want me to do. I can put this back and then this can just be checked off at the next meeting rather than do it here, because a lot of what you see here no longer applies.
That sounds great, Peter. That's what my suggestion would be as well, which is that's why we're having this meeting. We assume that we'd be, sort of, back and forth related to
Great.
it. So let's hold this section and then we'll come back with this understanding of the board of directors section itself. And then does that work for folks? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
So that would mean that we jump to funding.
Yeah. This I did very little to, because this is the part that I need guidance on in terms of, has to do with all what you all want to go to. The contributions, the mills. That's why it's all highlighted, but yet you don't see any red lines. So I would throw it back to you all for this section.
Right, and I think what we do is we just move from top to bottom, if you will, 16 through down. Go ahead.
Can we go back for a minute to 10 and 11 in the prior?
Okay.
That prior section, Kelly, I agree with Peter. What I read is that Peter was, that misunderstanding has sort of impacted a lot of different sections, and they're basically
Won't be taken
all
out.
gonna need to be.
Yeah, I will, even the things where my comments say unnecessary language, I will go back and review those in light of this, what I now clearly understand is the
Okay.
intent. So that will affect a lot of what you see here, Kelly.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have several comments too, if we were discussing that.
We're not like, but I think the idea is not to discuss that and let Peter have another crack at it and with this clarification, and then we'll come back at the next. Okay, so funding 16. So the difference between the green and the yellow, Peter?
The reason I did it that way is because the green section had to do with, when are we going to be determining? Well, let me rephrase that. I highlighted it in green because it had to do with, it might affect what I thought was kind of a trigger on looking to, which is, we'll get to further, a trigger onto whether we should be looking to a 32. And the date here of October 15th, there was a whole discussion about whether we wanted some of these in an audit report, half yearly at the end of a budget year. So that was the reason I did that. This is all existing language just relating to the mills. But this actually has to do with the report to each party. And there was discussion of what reports we're looking for. There was also a question as to whether or not indeed this has been done successively each year.
There's something about the timing and of the reports, because we talked about that last time, and the
Right.
way the revised IGA looks at is there's a July 30th annual report followed by a capital assessment inventory in September and a budget setting in the 15th of October. Is that right? And then there was a question or a discussion last time about around the annual report. Is there an annual meeting that accompanies that of the parties for that evaluation? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, the Fire Authority, I don't know, I think that might go in this section, but we'd also like a request on what deductions for the following year are going to be taken out. For budget reasons.
So
So you want to see that in paragraph 16? That
16.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it goes in here, but yeah, no, just so if X amount of dollars are taken out for treasurer's fee or administration fees for our budget, we'd like to see it so we can tighten the budget up. when we do our budget.
So you mean the cost of
What does that mean?
You mean when the fire authority board does its budget or when Idaho?
Our third board would like to receive an estimate on costs that we deducted from funds that the county transfers to the fire authority. Just so we know, if it's Z amount, you guys take Y, and we end up with W. It's,
We can,
so we know what kind of income we
we
have.
can definitely tell you that.
I see what you're saying. So you're talking about. I mean, that might make, Peter, I'm curious to hear what you think. That might make more sense in paragraph 19.
Yeah.
That's where we talk about taking those fees and we can add a sentence just saying, and we will notify the parties.
Yeah,
Or do you want us notifying the parties or the fire authority board or?
yeah. Notifies the fire authority. Budget purposes.
And so that's the final, after the contributions are reduced based off of all the, fees and administrative expenses. What is that actual amount? So, party, or so that will be provided to the fire authority, that final,
Correct.
after
Correct.
all those deductions.
Yep.
Does that then also appear in the fire authority's annual report so that all of the parties are aware of what that was?
It should.
What do we call that number? That final, after all the deductions, what is that? That's a
It's the
Final ESD contribution.
Yeah.
final ESD contribution thing.
So do you want, who's doing the notification? Because who's doing the who's doing all these?
Yes.
That would be the county providing that number every budget year.
Okay,
That would be us, that would be county staff providing that number to the fire authority.
and do we want a deadline for that to be produced since they have to put their budget and have it ready by October 15th for consideration to their board?
Sure.
What
Can we-
works?
Can we combine that with that,
July 30th.
I don't think July 30th works because
Right, no, that wouldn't work.
we won't know the fee, well, the
Yeah.
anticipated fee at that
It's
point.
gotta be that.
Can I get back to us on what that deadline is? I mean, when are you finalizing your budget numbers?
I do my first draft in November.
Oh,
So we've got some time.
So we've got
October,
time. So I was gonna ask for October 30
that's fine.
and
Yeah, our budget's already built in the board's hands at that point, so. Yeah, that's,
That's why our budget is as late in the year as it is, because all the partners do their budget. And then we get final numbers from all the partners, and then starting in November, build the budget for December approval, and it kind of lines up, it's by design.
You hear
Okay.
that, Peter? So.
Yeah. So I'll make it by October 30th, and I will probably. I'll reference this. I don't know if I'll term it administrative costs or just costs of collection, just restate cost of collection, since that's what we're providing to the fire October 30th. Which you need to equal the final ESD contribution. But you need that information, but that's not, the information itself, I would say the cost of collecting the revenues. So,
can we look at combining 16 and 41 together somehow?
16. Why don't you describe your thinking, Kelly? The annual report and.
you mean 38?
No, 16 and 41.
You're talking about the annual report?
Yeah, that's on the 30th of July.
38.
That.
Because they both require similar items.
We do need to look at these two together. You're right. But I think you're talking about paragraph 38.
What, you're talking about the no later than
The red line.
July 30th?
You looking at the red line, Kelly?
Yellow
Okay.
paragraph. annual.
No, it's under annual report, number 41.
Did we look at the same document?
No.
He's
we're-
not looking at the red line.
Which you have
No.
38 and then one that.
Kelly, this is what everybody else is looking at.
Yeah, 38. Sorry, I can't read that from here.
Did you get a copy of the red line?
Yeah, I get it.
Well, I'm looking at the one you sent me on Saturday.
I gave
That
you,
says 41. This one here, the
That's 30.
revised one says 38.
Red
I'll
line.
update. I apologize for being.
As we're looking at this.
yeah,
It's 38 and 16 via what's in
38,
terms of,
red line.
to combine the annual.
I don't think we can combine them, but I do think we need to look at them at the same time. Because I think there are things in 16 that need to be in 38. 16 is, correct me if I'm wrong, 16 needs to be there and that date needs to be there so that the municipalities can do their budgeting. We don't also want to saddle the fire authority staff with delivering its annual report at that time during budget season. So we're using paragraph 38 to set up this annual report that includes all the stuff that we think we want. And I thought what we discussed was sometime in May.
We did, I think we agreed May was a good time to do an annual report. It would be done in this format in which we're sitting versus individual. Because that cleaned up the communication as far as doing essentially 5 meetings versus doing one. And maybe a follow-up if that's required. So I think 38 would be where that May.
16,
Go.
really, the only thing that can come out of 16 for the budgeting is for me to send the letters that I've been doing. It's the way I've been doing it for the history of it, is to send the letter of notification what the contribution is going to be.
Right.
The municipalities get that, the ESD does not. I have to wait for the ESD to tell me, or for the finance director to tell me what her number's gonna be.
I completely agree with that. And I think if we're looking at paragraph 6.
So what I did is, just so you're aware, this isn't where it's gonna stay, but I just took 16, which now shows as 39. I put it there so that you can look at them together. And then I'll put it back. I just think for ease of having the documents and being able to look at the different language, it's nice to have them side by side. And that's the best I can do in terms of side by side.
So Peter, then can you, on what's now 39,
Right. It could
um,
be 16. Yeah.
the second line says shall include, and then it has this whole list of things. Will you just highlight that shall include down to, and the planned exercise of the lease options? That whole section. If we want this to be in an annual report, this is what should move to 38. And then what's left just needs to be cleaned up to make sense.
Right.
Right? What's left, just basically it needs to state what Kelly just said. Fire authority needs to let the municipalities know what their contribution is.
On the October 30th, on October 30th
But
versus the
I
15th.
can give it to them much sooner than that, because the assessor gives me the numbers by the end of August typically. So the September 15 date can.
We just switch
That
it
seems-
for that.
kind of. That seems to be, in terms of the date for that, but then, sorry, so what you're suggesting then, George, is like,
Well, George, if we remove that, like I just did, we're saying the authority shall submit a report to each party on or before September 15th of each year, together with the authority's anticipated funding request. Don't we need to define what report we're talking about?
I mean, it's basically the report is the funding request. Like,
No longer a
Then-
report.
The report, we're talking about moving an annual report into May. So you would have it in May instead of September.
It just eliminates September 15th from that.
So the only thing missing from that, if we do the annual report in May, it's not gonna have the audit, which comes in mid-July.
that last paragraph in 16, that last sentence, no later than October 15th. I think that's the only thing that we need in there. Right? And I'm not like trying to say that needs to be the final language, but that's what we're trying to say.
Switch it to the 30th.
Yeah, because the rest of that's in 38 or 39.
Right. And then when we're looking at 38, we talk about what do we want the annual report to be?
What do you want to know about in May?
Right.
Don't have the word report. It's not even a report.
It's a funding
just the
request.
funding request.
Yeah, that's the funding request.
Submitted.
And Peter, I'm doing my best to take notes, which I will share here.
No, that's fine, and I'm just kind of. I'm doing this so that you can see it, it doesn't have to be final. So, sorry.
And then it's a, yeah.
Is that? So then we can get rid of, well, what I'll do is I'll clean this up, but I think that's generally what you're saying, and then. Now I have to go back for a second, sorry about this. I did not save what I took out. Okay, sorry. Going back down now to my own change. I may have to do this offline since I may be screwing myself up here. I should say that a little more delicately than I just did. So I know what it is. I'm reversing these changes just to put some stuff back in, but I know what it is you're looking for now. So what we'll do is, and you'll see this in a second, when it comes back in. Up is. I'll be taking this and moving it up to 16. And then I'll be changing the dates here on, excuse me, I'll be moving this and putting this somewhere in
38.
38. So I'm just putting it at the end right now, so I remember to do it. So I'll work it in there, and then this is where I'll end up changing the date and the report and that language, etc. So I have my orders, I understand what it is we're going to be looking to. But this is for my own purposes.
Yeah, great.
And I'll come up with some language that will make sense, because some of this may not even need to be in there, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's really, just to be clear, the 39 there is really about the funding requests by the 30th of October.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I've just made that. So let me just put here. So I remember. Okay, I'm gonna go back up now. So that's why it was highlighted in green.
Good. That was a good discussion.
I have a question on 20. Could Peter explain the reason for that language?
So 20 being.
The final ESD contribution will be compared with the ESD's base contribution to
So
the other party.
yeah, so just so we're clear, everything you see highlighted was in the last agreement. So this was the determination, the final ESD. It was determined, I guess, when we negotiated the last agreement, that the contribution will be compared with our base contribution. And I mean, it is. What's your question specifically? Because that was the last
What is
agreement.
it measuring and why is it 100%? So you're making a fraction of what you took in and then what you took out. You divide those two numbers and make them a percent. I don't understand why we did that.
I can't speak to the specific math as to why they did that. I just know that I do recall us all discussing this, it going over us, going back and forth with the particular language. George may remember. Not to put you on the spot, George, but I can't speak to the finance aspect of it.
This is basically saying, if I'm reading it right, the base contribution and there's a difference between the base contribution and the final ESD contribution. That difference is the fees that the county takes. Paragraph 20 is, in a way that's not too clear, basically allowing the municipalities to also reduce their contribution by a proportional amount. And for some reason, it's saying, but you can't go over that.
And I would argue it should be taken out.
That's funny.
Yeah,
And
because
has the situation ever arisen? Because this has
Right,
been language that's been in there for quite some time. This wasn't, I don't even know. I mean, we did change some of the others up here, I recall from last year. From 2 years ago, I think a lot of this was language that was in there. I just don't know that it's ever come up.
the county's fees that are taken out of our contribution are the treasurer's fees, which is set in state statute. And then we conduct with an outside consultant a full cost allocation plan for the indirect cost of providing service or providing government. This is based on federal law, so we can ensure that we get reimbursed for all the human services work that we do. But we do that entire cost allocation based on federal law to determine the amount of time the commissioners, the amount of budget that come out of the commissioner's office that impacts, that relates directly to the emergency services improvement district. So $14,000 out of all of their time is associated with the commissioner spending time doing work for the ESGID. So that's how we get up to that magic number, which this year is going to be $56,910. But again, those numbers they're not pulled out of thin air. There's an actual federal law that we're using to actually make those calculations, right? And so, I mean, if we're going to include language like this that allows the municipalities to do that, it's got to be defendable, right? You got to be able to defend that you're actually taking that number out for your services, like we can do through the study that we're actually doing every year to provide a rate to indirect costs and overhead.
John?
Well, and I think then based on what you're saying, and actually it now makes sense that this was just language that was thrown in there, again, for equity, as far as whether it was supportable legally, would be up to each of the municipalities or the other parties to determine. From the county's perspective, as long as we're doing what we were doing correctly, that was correct. But I do recall that this was actually something that was thrown out there just for equity purposes. I don't know that any of the municipalities have ever done this. And I would encourage them, they'd have to check with their legal counsel whether it is something that they could do as municipalities. So I kind of agree with Brian. It may just be too messy and maybe we should take it out. And especially if when Jeremy, for example, looks at it and questions it in and of itself, then that makes sense that maybe it's not clear. Right?
John Curtis has had his hand up. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, on this base, the fire authority would like to see a detailed itemized list of all costs deducted. Because right now we don't know. I'm not saying.
Yeah, that's what you asked for earlier, and we can definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
you're not doing anything wrong. We just like to see what you.
Yeah, no, that's different.
That's a different discussion.
And that goes into.
So I think
That might be at 19.
Yeah, I think the proposal on the table is to strike this. Like 20 in terms of based off of what they've just been talking about. So thoughts on that about, again, brevity, we want to have the important components on there. We don't want to have pieces that may be confusing and aren't kind of applicable in terms of how you've been operating. So municipalities, thoughts, concerns with striking that 20? it's a good question.
What fees could we possibly have? Like you said, by law, you can do that. I don't, do we have any that we even could do? I don't think, I don't know. I've only been in here 6 years.
What
I don't
this-
think we've ever done it.
What this study
That's
basically
completely
does.
different, yeah.
Sorry, I mean to interrupt you. This study basically tracks our staff time. So like if
Yeah.
you were tracking your time, you could say, I've got this much expense associated with participating in this organization. That's not what, the agreement isn't structured
Yeah.
like that now. Basically, you just copy paste what we did, which is
Yeah.
probably not the best approach. Like if cities really want to take a fee based on anything that you're contributing, staff or otherwise, it should probably be based on what you're actually contributing.
Yeah, it's not like it's not like we're negotiating a contract and trying to get, or selling something and we're trying to get the best price for it. What we're supposed to do is account for actual costs that we encounter and be honest about those. And if there's a fee to be collected.
So to be clear, we're assessing a fee for finance time, for the county attorney's time, for our commissioner's time, for our treasurer's time, and then for property and liability insurance. Sure to driving our ambulances. So that's a fee based on that cost that we're paying to ensure your guys to be on our ambulances. So that's how we get to that bottom line of $56,000.
So I have a question for you, Brian, because you and I haven't talked about this. Is that number estimated? When you say commissioner time, is that number estimated or is that number accounted for? And is it documented and calculated?
Time is the wrong word. It's actually, so there's federal guidelines that outline how you can develop an actual indirect cost, and it's based more on total budget and than it is on actual time spent, because you're not tracking your time, right? So it's not based on time spent. It's based on
So
the.
what I was saying a moment ago is that we're supposed to count the beans and say, well, here's how much we're spending in beans. So if it's not a financial cost to the county, then my time is, it's just.
It's an indirect cost to the county, right? There are direct costs that we bear, and then there are indirect costs, right? So we're paying a county attorney to be here 40 hours a week, every week, but there's an indirect cost of the amount of time he's spending to get this document done, right? And that's how the federal government allows us to develop that indirect rate to come up with this cost.
So therefore, a portion of the mayor's time and a portion of the Jeanette's time and all those things would be just like that. So
They could if they paid for a study to figure that out.
And if we were
Also
doing
that much work too. That's kind of what I
and
was.
if we were actually paying.
Yeah.
Right, there you go. Right, there's.
Secret paycheck, I don't know.
And then the next step is about how it applies to the contribution,
Yeah.
which is where the
Sure.
proposal on the table is to strike that. And maybe what we do is we strike this and then you have a chance to review this with your attorneys if need be. But for the purposes, I don't see a compelling reason to keep 20 based on this discussion, but it's not my decision, it's yours.
at the end of the day, you and I shouldn't be, hitting each other's frying pans out in the driveway. So we can talk about this elsewhere, but I just want to introduce to the discussion that to me, there are actual costs that are driven by law that the county has to do things that cities may not have to do. And if that's an additional cost we have as a result of doing this that you don't, then we should get reimbursed. And then the other stuff, like some of these indirect costs and stuff, well, we can each have those indirect costs. So what's our policy about how we determine those in a fair manner so that people are paying their share and not more, not less, if we're gonna do that?
Look at
That's my take.
question on indirect costs. I'm glad you brought this up. So part of the indirect cost is insurance for us to ride the ambulance, right?
That's my understanding. I need to confirm that's accurate, but
So here's
my
my
understanding.
statement, though. So technically, if I'm providing staff to drive the ambulance, I should be able to bill for my staff time also, right?
You're not a party. Are you talking generally or are you talking literally as the authority? Because
Well, I'm asking the question, if part of our contribution is going towards our ability to drive an ambulance, which I'm fine with, and technically that costs my organization staff time,
it's,
Why?
If
why
you
does
were
that
to-
not balance out? It's just for curiosity question, just because this come up several ways.
So what I'm asking you is, are you talking, when you say if you drive an ambulance, are you talking as the authority? Or are you talking about one of the, the county that runs an ambulance?
No, as the authority, if I provide a driver or staff time for the ambulance, which is covered by the insurance.
Right.
there's no direct cost recovery for me as an organization, even though I'm incurring a cost by that. I'm taking staff offline to provide an EMS service, which I'm totally good with. Don't get me wrong. I think it's the way we do business and try to do business. It's interesting as we come up into this, into indirect costs versus
Yeah.
how do we balance some stuff out?
So you have kind of answered your question, which is that it's true. You do not get reimbursed. This is the IGA among the parties and their contributions. You are the entity that receives everything from these parties, so you do not get to bill us back for what we've contributed to you.
I don't think,
Is that what
is
you're
this-
asking?
is this relevant? I mean, I'm just curious, Jared.
Not relevant.
Is it relevant to the IGA?
No, and I was just wanted to bring that up real quick. It's this, because this has been come up a couple times. We're talking about indirect costs. And I'm all for admin fees, but it's for.
So I think in terms of the relevance, we can track that and maybe there's further discussions afterwards.
Kinda where I'm going.
For purposes of the revising of the IGA. I still haven't heard a reason for keeping 20 and I'm gonna suggest that we do that. And of course, nothing, we can undo that unless, or I guess it's 19, or 18 in that version.
Right.
So John, go ahead.
On 20? I have
Yeah,
questions
on
on,
this, we're gonna cap the discussion on 18, formerly known as 20.
so 19, after the EDS and municipalities, and if they want to deduct any costs they occur, if they wish to,
That's what 20 allows you to do.
Right.
20. No.
So if we take it out, then you won't have the ability to ever take out Idaho Springs fees for collecting.
Well, yeah, that's why I said 19. That's why I asked. We're still talking about 20.
So you're saying you would want to keep that in so that the Idaho Springs has the ability to collect the fee on there?
Yeah.
Um,
And the county gets the write-off stuff. Why doesn't the municipalities get the deduct stuff?
Yeah.
I have a suggestion here. I mean, I think what you're talking about, John, is totally logical. Right? If the municipalities are incurring expenses in support of the fire department,
Right.
take it out of your.
Lawyers fees.
What I think my comment on 20 is rather than do that in some proportional way, which assumes our operations are the same when they're not. I would rather give you all the right to estimate what you think that fee should be. We don't have so that would be a change to paragraph 19 in some way.
Right, that's what.
Gives
Yeah.
just sort of adds the municipalities to that right.
An estimation or an actual study that tells you what it is.
Because that's how you get reimbursed. The indirect cost is demonstrating that exactly that piece versus, and so what that would mean is a study or similar to justify the indirect rates of which it may, but it is, I mean, sort of, but I think, Brian, what you're saying is you can't just pull a number out.
Correct. Can't just pull a number out of the air. It's got to be justifiable.
I will point out that's what the agreement allows us to do right now, right? Like right now, the agreement says that we could just say it's $200,000 this year. I will point out that we have not done that. I would be surprised if a municipality was gonna do that. I also I'd be fine with language, putting some guardrails on that, but I'm not super worried about it.
That makes sense. I guess, I mean, I was talking about estimated versus counting the beans, but as long as we're all following the same method, whatever that is, just so it's fair.
It sure messes with budget revenue numbers in a big way, potentially.
What I've noticed is since we started doing this, the numbers have been very stable. They basically moved with inflation because it's all staff time. Or that's my guess.
It's moving with inflation. It's moving with salaries going up, right?
Right, so, I think once we get it figured out, we got it figured out. Just the question, if the municipalities want the right, I support giving it to them.
Assuming we all want, assuming we all want to fund the fire authority, keep doing that and we know we need to fund it more. This is a little bit of I want to call it silly, but a funny topic to be on. Because does that imply that if we're keeping, that we're not keeping it afloat right now, we don't want to take any more away? That if we're going to make sure that everybody takes a chunk out of it, then we need to increase the base amount to compensate for what we're
Right,
taking out of it, in which case we should have just not done it to begin with or something. And I'm not suggesting there's the issue of equity, who has greater and lesser costs, and there's the issue of that state mandated treasurer's fee that we have, which is, that's just a thing. It's, we don't have any choice. That's a different kind of a thing than anyone else has, but that's, just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I mean, to
We
be,
do or we don't.
to be clear, the county's only been doing this since across the entire county. We've been doing it for human services because we have to, but across the entire county since 2021. And I guess it's a very common budgeting tool in local governments to recapture your costs and assign that back out to your other funds. Now, I think there was a period of time where quite frankly, the county was fat, dumb and happy getting all that money from the mine and didn't have to do that. But now we're in a general fund situation where we've got to recoup our costs as much as we can. And that's why we're doing it. But to be honest with you, I got staff internally in the organization who are responsible for those other funds who are also paying the same fee and have the same complaint that Kelly does right now, that he's having to pay it. So it's,
So can the fire authority get a copy of that?
of course.
Okay,
It's, you,
in our email.
huh?
I sent it to him. He missed it.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't receive it.
Did you get the latest one though?
no, I sent you guys the 2022 one.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure exactly where we're at as it relates.
So I'm gonna jump in and wonder if we should. I think have an answer on removing that section that I deleted here.
Yeah.
But I'd like to go back up to ensure that what's now paragraph 18 is what everybody still wants. Because again, this is coming into the whole funding issue, and how are we going to fund the authority? Because what I didn't add is anything related to sales tax or, contributions or public safety tax contributions. I did not do any of that.
I think we decided that we didn't need the IGA, the property taxation system is fractured. And so we need language helping us figure out who does what based on whose rates. A countywide sales tax won't have that factor. By the time the voters say, yes, I'll support this tax for a fire service, the county is going to collect that tax and be bound anyway. Correct?
Yes.
And so, do we need any language related to sales tax collection? Do we do?
From a legal perspective, you don't. It's up to you all, whether you want to add something in there to note this, because otherwise, just so we're clear right now, the only contributions that are provided for in the IGA are the mills.
Not to exceed.
You mentioned that the county fees are 8.6%, correct?
I don't know.
George,
Sorry?
you mentioned that county treasurer's fees for collecting is 8.2%, 8.6%. And that's why I just wanted to.
I don't know that percentage off the top.
I
of my
don't either.
head.
Yeah, I thought it was part of 3 meetings.
Last sheet I had, the calculation, the deduction on it was 7.7. And it's gonna go up 0.2 each year projected.
Seems high. I'll find that.
And I can share that with you.
Maybe we just
That
need.
came from
information
Maria.
on that.
So what currently exists in front of you and is highlighted is what is currently in the agreement. So the question I have is, if the idea here is to, if part of the impetus of even this exercise of evaluating the different governance models, the interplay with the different tax and funding models was also part of this whole discussion. Are we considering just entering into basically having this IGA, but changing nothing with one of the issues that brought about this whole discussion for the last 9 months? That's what I'm asking all of you if we need to add something, or are we going to, I hate to say, leave it in the same situation, but that does sound like what we are doing if we don't make any changes to the language.
This be where we add the ability to collect sales tax and all the versions of that we've talked about would be in the language of these paragraphs.
To give the option to,
Give the option, right?
Option
Right.
for.
is that what you're suggesting, George?
I'm suggesting that we add to 19 to basically give the municipalities that option and come up with some language around, I mean, it's gonna be a little bit different because you guys can't charge a treasurer's fee, of course. So it's just like, it's gonna be a little bit different, but get you the right to estimate and charge a fee. You know, I do kind of like, and I'm happy to have the requirement that that estimate like be done by a third party or be like some kind of a standard there. I'm into that. So if that's what we're talking about,
No,
I've got.
that was not my question. My question is, it's not the fees that the municipalities could charge and get back from what their payout is.
Sorry.
So this is what I understood. So part of the impetus, of the mission CIT was not just the governance structure. It was the fact that the authority has indicated it needs more money to fund, to run its organization. That what it currently receives is not enough. It needs more. So we looked at these funding models, whether it was doing the Title 32, which now allows sales tax and mills, whether we brought it in-house to the county, and then it was up to the county, whether it would do a public safety tax, would apply across to everybody, or something in this IGA. What I'm saying is if we leave this language as it is, then nothing changes in the funding. And
There's no more revenue that's brought to the table.
right.
I hear you, Peter, and I also heard you say there's no legal reason to contemplate a sales tax ballot measure in this IGA. And I have also heard you say there's no reason to put things in this IGA. I don't have legal necessity to be there, right? Like, or
Right,
relational necessity to be there. So this is
but
where like, I'm not sure where.
Okay, so the reason is that if it is the desire of the parties to be looking into additional funding models and contemplating it, then I do think you would put in there the intent of the parties is to determine additional funding mechanisms, et cetera, unless you're just planning to, because otherwise the way it is, there's nothing that forces the parties to make any changes here in terms of the funding.
Well, it says mill, ESD mill, so I think that's where you add
Peter, yeah, so can the
the
county,
language.
if the county passed the public safety tax and wanted to give money to the fire authority, based on the language that we have in here today, could we give that money to the fire authority or would it need to be amended?
We would have to amend it. And the reason why is there's no provision for us just to give money.
That's what I thought.
That's where you add the sales tax option into the
Okay.
language of the IGA to allow that funding option in the future, because as it's written here,
So then what we're saying is we need to add a paragraph saying that the ESD may, or it might even.
any party may pursue a sales tax. However, people need to word it. Any party to the agreement can pursue a sales tax to be used towards their as part of their contribution.
Yeah, and what I would.
Here's where this gets complicated though, right? We're not talking about running a sales tax to replace the mill levy that's in place.
Top of this.
We're talking about trying to add additional funding.
Well, no, but for example, say a municipal partner wanted to run a mill levy and sales tax combination, like where Plume is all mill.
Mhm.
It gives them the option where right now, basically it's a mill or mill equivalent. Which is good for the municipal partners because they can do a mill equivalent, but you as the county can't, as I understand it. So that's why I think the language change here to whatever Peter recommends, it allows all of those options for all parties. It would be key if you say you want to increase above 10 mills.
max, which is currently in there, because we all know we need more funding, that would be another discussion of what that maximum needs to be, whether it's 10 is good or 11, 12, whatever that needs to be within the group. That's how I understand this section.
Right, and this is but the other reasoning for, that I'm bringing this up is because while we would put something that might say parties may contribute additional funds, you know, from whatever source, whether they want to run sales tax or whatever, the key is, you know, Idaho Springs, Empire, they're just not going to just say, okay, we're just gonna give you guys an extra 100,000, thanks, and we'll just continue with everything else. And I mean this, I'm not picking you guys out, the ES would be the same way. It's not like we're gonna say, okay, we're just gonna give you an extra 200,000 this year because we feel like it. No, we're likely to say, we will make these contributions, but it will affect the other aspects of our contributions, or, you know, to maintain some sort of equity. It would require some sort of renegotiation. I just don't see any party just randomly giving money to the fire authority that none of the other parties has to do.
It's interesting, Peter, because they just did. But I think that's not the point. The point here is that it's only the ESD that may need authority to say, yes, we can collect a sales tax and contribute that here. Right now, you guys, the municipalities, can come up with your contribution, agreed upon contribution in any way. So I don't think that anything needs to change for you. I think we need an additional paragraph or an insertion to a paragraph that exists, just saying that we may collect a sales tax dedicated to fire and give it to the fire authority. I don't think we need anything else.
Can it be broader than that? Not dedicated, just collect a tax,
Right.
just collect a sales tax
Yeah, I would,
towards the fire authority, so it's not
It's not as.
pigeoning us into a.
Yeah, well, no, we absolutely can, and I would make the language a little more. Yeah, it would, I understand what you're saying. I made a note and I will add that paragraph. But I just think we need something in there. Otherwise, it seems like we haven't moved the ball on the funding aspect at all.
What's different in the county that the cities wouldn't have a problem contributing with the sales tax? Back to, can't we just say all parties may do sales tax if they want, or big sale?
I mean, the ESD, because it gets, the county would have to, the Board of County Commissioners would have to run a dedicated public safety sales tax to fire, not the ESD board, the Board of County Commissioners, right? So it's kind of like another party. It's a little, it's like a legal fiction, but
It does have to be.
we're just complicated in a way that you're not,
More
basically.
Municipalities have way more leeway in how we fund anything under statute, where the county is very box. You can do A, B, or C in the following order and not D. Municipalities could do D all day long if they choose to.
I wasn't thinking of that restriction.
The difference happens. How the applicable CRS is written.
Peter, would you, just kind of read, not just the concept of the additional language that you were thinking about as it relates to this, just so summarize and maybe move forward on this. No?
Did you hear that, Peter?
Yeah,
Okay,
Sorry.
are you asking me to summarize it? Because basically
Well,
I'm just making.
Yeah, go ahead. So it's that adding language that the ESD contribution for a public sales tax, the permission to do that with the expectation that additional funding is going to be needed in terms of we're going to talk about funding here in a moment, but I think Pete, he's sort of getting back to the original point about that with the existing resources, just isn't sufficient for the kind of services that at least in terms of the better Or better, the better category that we were talking about.
And what I have in mind and what I wrote into my notes is just that we may impose a public safety sales tax for fire services and dedicate those funds to the fire authority. This additional funding will not increase the obligations of any other party. And if you like it, Peter, it's in my notes.
Good, that's what I was counting on.
Okay, can we more on that? So where do we stand in the remaining sections of funding?
Peter, I always want to make sure we get John's request in 19 to provide some kind of an itemized list. Want to make sure you captured that.
I'll make a note.
Yeah,
And then I'll,
itemized list of our administrative fees.
okay. Got it. So I don't believe anything else in here. So like I said, I didn't make any other changes to this section, but I also don't recommend any particular changes to any language here. There was nothing that I felt was problematic. So I just left it.
One is about equal contribution, quarterly installments. Next one is contribute the specific amount of the actual specific ownership tax.
Right.
Next is failure to provide some or proportionate share of the funding. Breach, and then what happens if after there's a breach, and how to regain representation. Anything more on that? Okay. Equipments and facilities.
Yeah, there were no changes in this. I did want to request Kelly and or Jeremy to just go over the Exhibit A from the last agreement, and if there have been changes or updates, to provide that to me so that I can include it as the Exhibit A for this agreement.
I can get that to you tomorrow.
And we're still taking all of our apparatus and we're assigning it to a municipality or a party that owns it technically. Like I see that 2002 Ford F-350. So this Georgetown owned.
Yeah, because of the original, they made the original purchase, therefore it's still a Georgetown asset, similar to
Right.
the 1984 engine, all that stuff is listed that way, so.
These are,
Yes.
A new truck.
these are
Yes.
assets owned by the parties.
As the trucks get replaced, they become
The
essentially
fire authorities.
a fire authority vehicle
Yeah.
ownership, and we've slowly replaced vehicles over the years, but there's still some I guess lingering apparatus that are historic by definition, by who bought it, so. trying to get
Yeah,
rid of it.
so
Is that the definition of a lingering apparatus? I wanted 1984.
Well,
20
yeah, there's some stuff, I think, for the most part, the stuff now is fire authority.
Yeah.
Which is great, but there's still some ESD assets in there, so there's Georgetown. There's a trailer and some other things that were Idaho Springs still that.
yeah,
So there's still some stuff that's lingering from the original agreements back when we were fighting over Exhibit A was. Who contributed nozzles to the fire authority and which nozzles are mine? And we pared it down to this, to the assets, but there's still some stuff on that list.
yeah. If you look at the Exhibit A, it's pretty straightforward as to the ownership. And as things get replaced, how it works. And then in that section that we were just at, equipment and facilities, it does outline how ownership transfers, how things get replaced, what happens if somebody leaves. So all that remains the same. I updated it to make it more active. I think that was the only thing I had to do was continue to, that type of thing. There were no changes I recommended in here. Debts of the CCFA, that's pretty standard language, so I didn't change that. I did not feel that this existing mutual aid agreements had any applicability anymore. This is a holdover from many years when many of those agreements probably did exist. There are no independent mutual aid agreements that I'm aware of between the parties that specifically deal with fire protection.
Is that right?
That's
Yeah.
correct. There's nothing existing.
Yeah, so I just was gonna remove that. The next section, which has to do with the pension, Kelly, I'm going to suggest that Bob Cole review this particular section, because there have been amendments to the FPPA since, in the past couple years, there have been several amendments that have renamed some of these funds. I just want to make sure that the specific one relating to you all is correctly referenced still, because I believe there may have been updates. So I was going to suggest that Bob or somebody else that represents the authority double check it. If they can't, let me know, and then I'll delve into it more. But I see most of my comments, yeah, just confirming the information.
Right.
Term of agreement. So I basically did this for the 5-year term and then one additional 5-year term. The other option, candidly, is to just make it a 10-year term, because there's always the option for any party to, and this was language we agreed to last time, unilaterally initiate renegotiation of the agreement at any time. So I don't have a preference about this.
I do. I think if the parties aren't getting together to check in on this agreement and say, do we still like this? At least every 5 years, we're neglecting our duties. I think we should have it. I think we should obligate whoever's here in 5 years to take a look at this system and reaffirm that they think it's the one they like.
That's not what this says, though. This agreement shall automatically renew for additional 5 terms unless an agreement is renegotiation unilaterally.
I know, and that's what we negotiated too, which I can live with, but my preference is actually that every 5 years we have to get together and affirmatively.
Okay, and
GA.
I believe we address what you're looking for, although we do it sooner. In other language where we're talking about, I'm pretty sure I added language somewhere further down in the agreement that basically says get together and discuss the functioning and everything. However, it's not to review the agreement itself. It's more to make sure that everything's working with the organization. And that I think I threw the language in there further down.
It's 36, Peter.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's paragraph 36. I mean, I'm totally fine. Paragraph 33, in addition to being my lucky number, I love it. I don't have any problems with it.
Okay, so if that's the case, I'll leave it just 5-year term and then an automatic 5-year term. Then there's no harm in doing it that way whatsoever. Okay.
Can I just play devil's advocate for just a moment around the unilaterally initiated renegotiated thing? So is that under any condition for any reason, just, say that there's a disagreement about something else, or is there some standard? Is it just?
Yeah, so the reason I said
You would never do that.
So basically it just means any of the parties can come to the can reach out to the other parties and say, I want to renegotiate this section or that section. The parties will come together. If they cannot come to some sort of agreement, or the majority of parties don't want to change anything, the party that's seeking whatever it's seeking has the opportunity to withdraw further described lower in the agreement, where it'll talk about withdrawal, but that's what it basically would allow for withdrawal. But everybody should have the right to
raise it.
to raise it. So that's why we put it that way.
I mean, does it make sense to just make this simple and say that it's a 5-year term? And in 5 years, we're gonna have conversations about whether we want another 5-year term instead of like unilateral demanding a renegotiation if we want, but maybe it's automatic and maybe actually we'll negotiate anytime.
So if you do that, it'll be similar to where the situation we're currently in. Where, so do we have a 5-year term, but at year 4, we get together and check in? And
I mean, that's my preference, but I'm not like stuck on it. So I don't want to like take this up because we discussed this last month and I can live with what's there.
I didn't mean to unnecessarily probe that, but it just, just be clear on what you're doing. What do you think?
yeah. And we can sit, if you all want to sit with it, I mean, obviously we can change it some more if you want to look at that language, and I'll leave it as is right now, and unless I hear differently, but I mean, we will have a subsequent meeting to go over this. And maybe there will be more time for some of you to not, digest it.
I think the 5-year is good, and I think the automatic should be there. What we're also establishing with this is that the annual report will be with this group. So they'll see each other and probably discuss fire department things at that time. And maybe that's the time that this document comes up. We want to change that. We don't want to change that. I think for the stability of the organization, the 5 and 5 with an automatic renewal is good with this document because it can be changed at any time. Maybe next year at the annual report, there's Idaho Springs wants out. I don't know.
I also like the idea of if we're in the throes of trying to make District 32 happen, I don't want to be in the position of having to put that on pause because now we have to renegotiate the IGA because we're not going to be finished with the District 32 yet.
Yep.
And, it just, if it's got that automatic renewal at 5 years, I think it gives everybody enough stability to continue. We can change gears if we need to because funding isn't keeping up. We've got to put other actions into play faster. I like the idea of being able to have this automatically renew.
I see a bunch of heads nodding. Anybody? Okay, so let's move forward with that language there with the automatic renewal.
Okay, nothing in this is again just a Scrivener's change, nothing substantive. I've removed the arbitration clause for a couple reasons. One, it is not something the county does anymore, and the state of Colorado doesn't allow it in their contracts either. There's an argument that it may be contrary to the Constitution, the state constitution. So we summarily take these out and strike these out of our contracts. There's also really no reason for an arbitration clause. If for some reason litigation came up between the parties or among the parties, which I think is unlikely, but let's say it did, we would end up resolving this in district court, but we would likely go to some sort of mediation before ever getting to this point. Binding arbitration essentially puts the decision in the hands of a single person who is not a licensed attorney necessarily. And I just strongly recommend against having this. On behalf of the county, and therefore the ESD, I would say that we would want this out. But certainly if any of the municipal attorneys or the fire authority really is not technically a party to this, so it's really the parties. So if any of the municipalities have a problem with removing this, we can always discuss that. But I think it's very unlikely you would have any pushback by any of your attorneys on this either.
Sounds like your opinion, the opinion of the policymakers in the room might be similar to mine. When my attorney says strongly suggest, I say, okay.
So unless, yeah, so
Under my-
we can move
Hey, manager.
forward unless there's some different perspective about binding arbitration. Annual report?
Okay, don't get confused by
This is
this
where-
part, because remember, this is really 16. These are from my notes in terms of what says is 38. And then I'll be adding something more detailed here, but we could add a paragraph if you want. I mean, I don't know, maybe the annual report will automatically trigger the parties to be having that communication that George was referring to, but I can add language as well. I just don't know if that's necessary if we actually abide by having a joint meeting where the annual report is presented.
I guess that was my question, is there language about a annual joint meeting? Did I miss that?
We talked about it.
We did that at the last meeting, but I don't think it's in the
isn't.
IGA. And I thought that was a question about, should it be, is that too much? Like just assume that you'll determine whether or not you'll have an annual report meeting amongst the parties.
I think it makes sense to add it in this section here, and when you get to the audit report, which is also listed in this section, then put a separate date for when the audit report needs to come out. It does come out later in the year, what?
To July.
I think put a date in August that the audit report gets distributed, because on occasion, they get slowed down by the process. We all know how that works. So I think the annual report by no later than May 31st makes sense, and with the format in there that it would be a group meeting. And then change the audit distribution to be, August 15th, for example, that the audit report will be distributed to all parties. That way, if there is a hiccup or some strange anomaly, which I don't see happening, but I'd like to account for it, it's in this, because it's still part of an annual, every year we'll provide, the farther we'll provide an audit report. It's just a matter of putting the dates in there so that we've got something to go back on.
And the date of the 30th of June, I think we talked about May.
I think the 31st or the end of the last day of May. And if for some reason we miss it, for some reason we can talk amongst the parties and say, hey, we couldn't get accomplished it this year because of this, but we are going to schedule it in June, whatever, pick a date. But it sets the goal similar to what this has always done. If that makes any sense. And I think putting in here that it will be a joint meeting format, I think is kind of imperative. Is we make that change in the IGA that everybody agrees that it'll be a joint meeting format, a single update per year, which avoids the 5 meetings, the tour of information, as we'd like to call it, but everybody gets the same message on the same day. They ask the same questions in the same room. Also makes the organization run better, because having group feedback, I think it's way more important that we get the same question or 5 groups, and then you're trying to add those up and okay, this shows the answer to it. I think doing it in this format makes a lot more sense to me.
Okay, so Peter has adding the language around that you're going to hold a joint meeting, review and discuss the annual report, both the parties and the board. And then I think the question still is the date on there is what is the no later than what?
And just a reminder, I have to bolt in a minute.
Yep.
So as long as George takes notes on some of this and gets that to me, that would be great.
No later than June 1st, is what I heard. Let's keep going, just to use your time, Peter, because there's no changes.
Nothing here changed. Nothing in the miscellaneous. Just to point out, there's already provisions relating to disputes going to the district court. Sorry, that's my alarm telling me to go. And so we're set there. None of that's new language. And that's it.
Was this adding August 15th to the audit? Does that seem reasonable to the group?
I would also, our audit got postponed because of difficulty with the auditors. And I don't want to maybe hold things to a specific date,
Okay.
you know, because
That's fine.
they're allowed to take until the end of September
Right.
to file audit.
We've had to hire new auditors.
So maybe
before
we just,
here.
we could put it in here that the audit report is provided to the parties within 30 days after it's completed or.
Okay. That's fine, I think.
What if we were to do the,
Hang on just a second, because I know you gotta jump off, Peter. Just thanks for your first, all the edits. I think the work has to do with sort of the revised piece has to do around the Board of Directors, section and funding. And everything else, at least as I understand it, is really agreed to, and that will likely be the topic of our next meeting. The next one, maybe we have everything that's been accepted in just in not red line version for ease of looking at it, and then just the changes to those sections. Does that work?
That's good for me.
So you'll see a cleaner version than this one, and just wanting to set that expectation. Okay? We'll always have these versions that you can go back to.
Yeah. Is there anything?
Yeah. When is our next meeting? Is it October 3rd? And then Megan, I am having trouble unsharing. How do I unshare? Or will it just go away once I?
I'll just stop your sharing. There you go.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
I didn't hear it. No.
I have too much power.
I love it.
October
I
3rd.
love it. It's great.
Next,
Thanks, Peter. Randy's got a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the question I have about that, what we work off of, what our working document is next time is, and I asked Jonathan this, it's like, if there's anything that's outstanding, and it should still be in there where we can see it glowing, flashing red at us, okay, so we deal with it. But Jonathan's impression, and it was mine too, is that I haven't heard any substantial disagreement to anything that we've got going in here today. Is that correct? You all okay with the red lines and as they've been explained to us? Just so we don't drop the ball somewhere.
Yeah.
And two conversations from now, start throwing spit at the wall.
I do think that the funding and the governance piece should still be highlighted, and I think those are the two areas that we want to look at, but everything else is sort of, at least, I agree.
And I'm sorry I have to go. I've got too many meetings.
That's okay. Before we move to the other items in the agenda, and I think we can do this without Peter or Randy having to be here. I want to share what's on my mind regarding this annual meeting and report so that I can get information to Peter about what to put in there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
I just want to make sure we're on the same page so that Peter can get really clear notes, and in the next meeting, we're looking at final language. I think that paragraph is going to reflect a commitment to delivery at a group meeting. Date June 1. We're adding, as I understand it, the conversation ended with, we're taking everything from paragraph 14. We're adding it into this paragraph 30. Now it's 37 on my computer somehow. And my problem with that is that now you have this list that's like 10 things long, very specific about what needs to be in this report. And I don't even know if it's comprehensive. And so like, I kind of want to suggest like giving Peter some ability to use some language like that annual report shall include anything requested by any party. Right? So that this thing can be something that's evolving instead of like Kelly and Jeremy having to go check down the box. And I mean, is anybody so nervous about any of these things? Let me stop talking. What do people think about that?
So you're worried about having a rigid checklist to go down through that then negates in some ways the purpose of having an annual report and meeting, which is to kind of look at the sum total of, is this working, what's not working, and becomes really checkboxy kind of.
You're talking about having instead of having like super guardrails where you can only talk about this much, let everybody have free reign to say what they, address anything they want. Is that correct, George?
Yeah, and so I'm just asking, like, how much license do you want to give? How much you guys think it should say exactly this? Or are you okay with it saying something different that tries to not be so prescriptive? I'm worried by the time we combine those two paragraphs, you have a nauseating list of things that need to be there. Not like it's too much. It's just a lot. When I look at a list that long, I can't even tell anymore whether or not that has everything in it that I want.
There's some duplicates though, because this says, like, the capital assets plan, and there were two things about capital plans, one of them was
The other
inventory and something else.
duplicates as you get through this stuff.
And I kind of looked at it and went, I think some of those will disappear because we're talking about the same thing possibly, but I didn't have time to really match them up.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to take anything off because those look like standard things that should be in an annual report. It does say at least contain, so it certainly gives room for more things on the report or certainly more things to talk about. I don't know if there's stuff to come off, but I don't think our list is maybe gonna be as long as we thought. We'd take those two. I know there's duplicates. Maybe we make more general language.
So I'm not hearing a lot of anxiety associated with someone just looking at this list and making sure it makes sense.
Yeah, George, if I was supposed to do that, I would like to have a list of what the heck you want me to talk about at this meeting.
So
Yes, I,
So you're not like, oh, where's your whatever? And you're like, no, I should have brought that information.
As a minimum, not a sort of, but sort of flexibility to add other topics as necessary. So I hear that, like some expectation, like here are the things that, we're gonna want. And there may be other opportunity, other information, relevant information for evaluating or for assessing the authority's performance.
if you tie that all into having that annual meeting report and everything, change that date to the end of September so you can have everything possible in there, including the audit. You don't have to have a separate audit date requirement. It would include the request for funding for the next year. It would satisfy that notification. Just a thought to get you on there.
personally, I liked where the conversation landed last week was with, let's do this early in the year. Let's not do this when we're doing budgets. It's kind of after you've had a chance to review the statistics of the year before, but during a time when they're still relevant. Like, I thought that was a good time.
Well, it kind of, for me, it lines up, this is only my opinion, but it lines up, we do like operational improvement plans for the year, like we're making changes. I usually put those out, try to get those out by March. And it's a good time to also talk about how we change operationally within the year and is it working, not working? We had kind of have an idea at that point. Because every year, it seems like for the last 3 years, I've changed something that was reasonably significant on how we respond or how we conduct business on a daily basis. So I'd like to be able to cover that too in that May meeting. It is before wildland season, so that's also a discussion that probably should come up in the annual meeting. What we anticipate the season looking like and how our MIT crew is just coming out at that point. So there's a lot of updates that come out. Or development in. And then as we pursue grants, they usually start for me in July from the wildland side. So that's if I need letters and stuff or feedback, I almost need that in May because my first grant cycle's in July and my final grant cycle's in the end of October. But that's just my opinion how it lines up. I used to do
Earlier.
annual updates on the mining side in every year in May. So for me, I like that time of year. It's before really get rocking and rolling in the business season and you can kind of be in front of stuff.
So
Previous year's data.
The May timeframe, no later than June 1st. Having some flexibility associated with the topics, but also looking at some of those topics and prioritize those, and then we come back around that.
Okay, thank you. I think I've got what I just wanted to sort of measure the room. Are people really looking at this list with hawk's eyes or,
Yeah.
Is that a phrase?
It could be help.
Guys, it's like MASH. So on the agenda, we had a nice job on this. Thanks to Peter, thanks to all of you for helping work through this. We got a bit more to do. We have the community survey, presentation of the draft survey, Want to take a 5-minute stretch break? We're at about 2:50, so we've got about 40 minutes left.
It'd be worth it for everybody in the room. to
Yeah,
take a break.
let's take a 5-minute break.
Yeah.
where the community survey fits in the overall scheme of our discussions, which is about, you know, in terms of service levels and funding acceptability, and that, I think this is meant to get at sort of that funding level question. So I'll turn it over to
Got it up here somewhere. There we go.
George.
Start and I can finish.
That's right, it was the two of you tag tagging.
That's true.
So you also have a copy of.
Thank you, Jonathan. I am going to turn this over to Kelly.
This is what our committee came up with. Strong work from Bill. He's very valuable purchase, I would call. I think he's really sharp and he's got a lot of good stuff, so. It starts with information about our operations and our budget. I don't, you know, if you want to read through this line by line, we can do that, but I don't know that that's necessary. But it's up to you, any thoughts, if anybody's had a chance to look at it from the email.
I'm not sure. if
Is
you
this
can
what
read
it's
it
gonna look like?
Word for word here, I think maybe like section by section, maybe just about,
Yeah.
Yeah, why?
and then if there are questions, we can.
Break it
So
up.
the first section gives information on current and historic stuff. We were formed in 98. Our call increases. Talks about declining tax revenue. Need to have better response times. It also mentions that we do currently provide a high level of service to 9,000 residents. Other businesses across the county, gives our size. Our response area size, 348 square acres. We have 33 miles of interstate 7. And then we have our response time within 8 minutes for 33% of our calls in 23-24. It goes into fiscal year 24 funding, so it explains that our funding is based on a 4.569 mill levy. It does not say in there that the municipalities are participating at a 9 mill equivalent. I don't know that we had a conversation about that. I made a note about it. The state that our mill levy was set in 1989 when we were 100% volunteer. That was the start of the Emergency Services District. And that it was underfunded. There have been no increases in that funding rate since that start. So we've been operating on that level, which I believe someone pointed out to me that if we had been doing a cost of adjustment on that over the years, we would be over 9 mills right now. Shows there that our projected operating deficit 24 at the end of the year will be $940,000. We've been using cash reserves since 21 to fund our operations. And that without new revenue changes, we're estimated to be insolvent by 2029.
So I'll offer some color commentary. Beth already pointed out, this thing needs graphics. People will never read it. Beth, you're right.
Well,
Next step.
She said that for all of you, because you all had the same reaction. They will be in there. That text number, those will be presented as graphics. And then just in terms of, obviously, we're not bringing this to you because we want to like rewrite it together. We put a lot of time and effort into this. I'm not trying to sound defensive either. What we're trying to get you all to focus on is, what are the big problems?
Uh-huh.
Is there a big problem? Is there a glaring omission, something that's missing that absolutely has to be in there? Or something that just can't be the way it is? I can guarantee you every word in here has been debated by either Kelly or I. We're both on that team and you
That's
know how
good.
we.
So it's red flags and or,
Yeah.
you know, sort of glaring omissions. So.
Did you write it in the grade level?
So it goes over challenges, which we're all pretty familiar with. The funding numbers we came up with were, I put together a list of everything that was suggested from the mission CIT evaluation, and I put a cost to it. And that was in our best column. We then decided we should work on a better ask for the, because it was way beyond what we felt comfortable asking people money for. On the other side of that is a good service with some minor changes to what we're doing. And we settled on a list in the middle for better. That's where we come up with our numbers that then guide us to the questions that we're going to ask in there for, how much of an increase would you be willing to do? So we come up with funding options under that. A dedicated sales tax of 1.45% to fund for the changes suggested, and that came up to 3.6 million, which is quite a bit of money. Or it could be done with a mill levy only, which would have to be 14.67 mils. It does show in here that, and George brought up, it was a Redfin number of the average value of a home being sold in the county. I think what you said, 550,000.
Yeah, I thought I remembered 505.
505. So we took 50,000 off of that and came up with, we rounded it out at a $450,000 value home would be taxed at approximately $450 a year. And the commercial is more than that. So we show that a little bit. And then after that, there's more information in here. It shows a little more detail on why we're having impacts on demographics change, aging population, stuff such as that. And then we get to the good stuff on the back for the survey. So these are all questions that Bill has been working with other communities where he's been doing work, and he's got a pretty good solid base of question types that he asks.
Okay.
That's a really quick nutshell of this.
Questions about any of these red flags, glaring omissions?
I'd just like to bring them up. Is it worth anything to show what other fire departments are funded at?
Talk about that.
So, similar size fire departments would be,
I feel like we
just to show the disparity that we're not funding the fire department at the same levels.
It's kind of my memory too.
If you look at
For
127, there's a little bit of, that's the one with the three options. If you look at option 2, this would put funding for Clear Creek Fire Authority in a similar range as other high-performing fire agencies in Colorado. Like there's a little bit of that kind of qualitative, but we don't have like a chart showing what Evergreen Fire Rescue is chart, we
Oh, really?
don't have that. Is that what you're asking for?
I don't know if that would make more of an impact. And certainly from my perspective, it is like,
Yeah.
holy crap, we're not even funding this thing close to what people are paying for
Right.
fire departments. Like, I don't, if maybe people don't know the cost of fire department.
Right.
The frame of reference, right?
If you do that,
They need that.
you have the information, that chart 1.26 on the first page. That whole section, there's a chart, those is funding millage rates for Clear Creek, Telluride, Crescent, the Carbondale coverage. There's a bunch of charts that it recommends on the first page, similar to 126 in the Mission CIT report. So
Okay.
there are a series of charts that could be added.
Can you tell me that page number again?
It's page 90, starts at page 97 in the Mission CIT report. But
I mean, it just might impact somebody to be like, oh my gosh, our bar's a little teeny bar. Do I want my mills to increase by tenfold? Or do I want to pay 2.5 extra cents safe? I don't know.
2.5 cents.
I feel like we discussed that on the team and I don't remember what the I feel like we discussed it, decided not to do it, but I don't recall why.
The reason, and I
Yeah.
wish I could remember it, but I know we did kind of talk about that a little. I'm not sure. We can ask again to
Yeah.
get some clarification, but I know we had that
Like I
discussion.
would not.
I would say
say
that the
Telluride.
mills language is scary to the lay taxpayer, like, and I feel like to random person who's just reads it, that not understanding the entirety of it, especially the differentiation between the commercial and residential, could hurt the outcome.
Yep.
And yeah, 2.5 cents more at Safeway is a lot easier to swallow than $4,000 on a $1 million commercial property.
yeah, very much so.
That's kind of what
Purpose.
we're really, we really put a lot of thought into how to really get a solid signal from people. This is the situation. What do you think? And not try to advocate for one over the other. I mean, there's just a little bit of discussion, like the sales tax option mentions, something about helping visitors pay. Right, so there's just a little bit, but we're really just trying to help them have a little bit of context and not so much point them in one direction or the other.
Do you have something you would suggest to address that?
Because I apologize, because I haven't been able to attend a lot of these meetings. I think that maybe softening the language around the mills might be helpful. Or increasing the, I guess I would challenge, do you guys have a one or another option you would like to see come to fruition, or is it both? Like, what is the ultimate outcome? Is it the sales tax? Is it the mills? Is it the combination?
Well, ultimately, it needs to be a combination, but definitely the sales tax. And we can't ask for both at the same time,
Exactly.
because he said it would fail.
You gotta go back to the reason for doing this, right? What's the preference of the folks out there? Is it one or the other?
So are you referring to the language in option 2 that you're saying
Correct.
is?
That's the one that I think is the most abrasive to just be off the cuff. And I understand it, but I worry that again, since you mentioned the property tax system is funny. And so if we're trying to really get people, the sales tax is probably has more of a staying power on a ballot. Everybody knows that. So if it's you either separate out the commercial impact, because the average homeowner doesn't necessarily associate the impact of most homeowners in the county don't have commercial property. So they're not gonna feel that. I would try to lean more towards commercial properties taking a higher burden and giving a demonstration of that. So that people understand that they're in, greater terms, that they're looking at 400,000, or excuse me, what's the number, $400 on 450,000, right? Which is a lot more palatable.
Yeah.
The library is going after a mill levy this year too. Theirs is gonna be 5 on 100, I think.
Something like that, pretty close, yeah.
Yeah, so that's just it. And again, I apologize because I haven't been at this table as much as everybody else. I don't want to throw out a curveball, but that's just an observation.
Yeah, just so you know, the currently on unincorporated commercial property, it's $573 a year on that. Well, that's a 450, so. $1 million property is $1,274 currently. For what it would be at 14,670, so I'll have to do that, but it'll be $4,000 or so.
Yeah.
Pretty significant
I,
and painful for quite a few of them.
yeah, I mean. It is.
But almost like you need I need to do a separate survey for commercial versus residential, but
And it's just an observation that I think
yeah.
could be considered. But
In 2005, when we sold the mill levy for the animal shelter, we did it exactly as Amanda said. We said, you know, I'm asking you for $26 for, because we only did it for 1 year. We sunset it after 1 year just to build the building. And we said it's $26 if your house is $100,000. And I really believe that's what sold it for us. And we sold it here and in Gilpin County and it passed.
So just put a dollar value to the commercial and a dollar value to the residential.
I think if you just really do that frame of reference that George was talking about, give them something to compare it to.
So it'd be good if maybe the assessor would have an average commercial value.
In the purpose of this survey is to stimulate responses, right? About like hell no versus.
Average commercial.
Maybe identify the methods
Average
that
commercial
would resonate if it was out.
line,
Yeah.
commercial values, just put your numbers up.
So more, Amanda, or thoughts on that? It's interesting about the background related to this, and I just wonder, and it's not a flaw or something that's glaringly omitted, but it's a, you know, is there something about, there's an external, you know, audit, the mission CIT, there's some sort of, you know, and I may have missed that.
It's at the very end of the,
Oh, is it the very end?
the very end of the narrative.
Okay, and then the other one was, is there something about, you talk about the parties working together and talking about the parties we're considering, and so just something about this process, about how you're coming together around that, that would help. And I don't know if anything needs to be added either in terms of the background or the questions, those are the two pieces that I took a look at. So thanks for the mission. Missed that mission CIT. There it is, okay. The organizational assessment, yeah, right. Okay.
So you're talking about mentioning mission CIT and our collaborative work together closer toward the beginning of the narrative.
You know, I missed this, how it was printed. But for me, it was that I missed that. It's just like, okay, listen, it's not just we came up with this idea. We had an external assessment of which you've, you know, I think that to help to inform that, that's good. And then I was just, you know, sort of leaning into the fact that county and all the municipalities and it's working together on it, you know, that sort of, that, to me, that makes a difference in terms of giving confidence around governance. And thank you for what's.
Yeah, I've got it noted, thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions, anything?
Just really quick, Amanda, maybe offline or at some point, if you have like anything else you can say to help me understand how this can be helpful. I'm feeling a little bit.
I think it's great. That was just an observation I had from seeing it, is that again, if we're the rhetoric that we hear a lot in a lot of the interactions within the county is that it's so expensive to be here. It's we have a middle class that is continually feels like they can't afford it. And I don't think that's unique to Clear Creek. I think that is a Colorado problem and a very prominent problem in the Front Range. So I just know from the experiences we've had in going after other mill levies, which is like the one the school district went after last year, that was a big challenge. And when there was a tax that, and I apologize, I can't recall the year, was it ambulance, was it emergency services that failed? Did it pass or fail?
Passed.
It passed.
The health service district
Health, thank
fails.
you. Health Service District is the one that failed. That's the one I was not clear on. It seems like as soon as people feel like it's going to like impact them in such a big way, that it's a losing battle, no matter
Yeah.
what. And because the need for funding is imperative, I think the survey has to show messaging that there is a way out. It will not be catastrophic to your day-to-day. And that's just sort of the observation I had on that one particular
Okay.
set of language. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause a conundrum. I'm like,
No,
hey,
that's good.
everybody, I'm here. Let me just level. So,
It was good.
yeah, of course.
So unless there's more on the, I have a slide that says, we don't just put it up, but just like how will the survey inform this group's decisions around funding strategy? Depending on how we get, what comes out of this in terms of the results, obviously, any thoughts on that, Brian, or others about, or what do we do with this information? I always find it useful to think about that, and you know, whether it's the amount, clearly it'd be the level and the type of increase. Any other thoughts on that?
Do you remember the timing of what Bill was thinking about right after Thanksgiving, maybe? What do you say, right after the election?
Bill wants to kick the can until after the election.
Yeah.
So you're getting text messages, you're getting stuff in the mail already. I think the team largely agreed that
It's mid-November.
Yeah, put it out, get the results and come back as a group and evaluate what we learned.
The other thing we need to consider is, do we need to put it on the spring ballot? So that if it fails, we can go back on the fall ballot. Because if we don't get funding, we're gonna be in really bad shape.
Is that what the
Um,
consultants kind of thought, or on the timing?
we haven't jumped into that. I think that's where this conversation needs to go. One of the things that's not been said that I have on my mind for today is that I think this group should continue to meet. I mean, signing the IGA isn't like the end of this work, it's the beginning. Now we have to go get the money. We have to answer that question. What do we think is strategic? What does the question look like? Et cetera. So, I mean, I know like it's the Board of County Commissioners that will run the ballot measure, but I'm certainly, I'm not under any illusion that Randy or I or whoever just gets elected is popular enough to do this on our own. Like we're gonna need to work on this together. We need Kelly and we need Aaron in particular. They like people in uniforms.
I can't hear you, so.
I'm saying they like you. They like you. We want you and we want your uniform.
Agreeable. So that people like you, I think this was the message was. More on the survey? We have our next scheduled meeting on the 3rd of October. Here's what I would like to suggest for that, which is and we'll get a revised draft of the IGA. With those two new sections. That if there are comments or real concerns with the language, that we sort of raise those in advance so that we can tee them up. I'm not sure who the best person I'm happy to take those emails as well, but just so that we can look at the October 3rd as the closing of our discussions, so that you can go and talk with your, boards of governance boards as well. And so I just want to kind of put that out there, that the 3rd, we're going to want to the extent that we can, put a cap on those discussions here. And what'll be helpful is to get that input in advance from Peter's revised new draft. And that we got to focus on that. And I think that is probably the sole purpose of that meeting, unless there's more on the community survey discussion or other topics. But kind of getting to the close of this kind of phase of where we want to get to. That makes sense. Doesn't seem like you all can commit to this, one, reviewing the revised draft, secondly, sending your thoughts are related to that, and then we can just tee them up and kind of work through them. All right, well, good work, everybody. Thanks.
When did we say almost everything?
1 o'clock to 3:30. Thursday the 3rd.
Oh, we have to go back to BOCC.
Unless there's
No
more.
quorum.
No, I think we're,
Oh, so we don't need to adjourn?
We don't have a forum.
No.
No, we haven't adjourned yet. George hasn't adjourned us.
you're adjourned.
Okay.